Hello everyone, and thank you, Professor, for the nice introduction. So, my PhD, I've mostly worked on compression, 2D and 3D compression, and today I will be mostly presenting my works I have done and basically the direction of how the Gaussian splatting field progressed. So I think in the last presentation I was not here, but in the last presentation, Professor gave an idea of what was Gaussian splatting. So we'll start from there and then we will progress forward based upon the compression direction. So okay, so so uh, let's have a recap at what was Gaussian splatting. So Gaussian splatting in its basic form is a Gaussian in 3D. So we have seen a Gaussian in 2D, like you know about Gaussian distribution. What if we make it 3D? So now when we make it 3D, we are making a blob out of it, like this. So it has its position in XYZ space, it has its mean, and but now rather than just standard deviation, it has covariance because it's in 3D. Now we are associating some additional features to a single Gaussian, that is opacity. Opacity means how much it is visible in 3D space. And then there is color. So this paper of 3D Gaussian splatting was published in August 2023. But the technique in itself was actually very old. The original technique which was on which this whole algorithm was based on was published in 2002 or 2003, Eva splatting. And what made this technique very successful was that they made that whole splitting process, the rendering process, at CUDA level, at GPU level. So even if you go back to YouTube now and look at the videos about it, specifically posted by content creators in September 2023, October 2023, you will find a lot of buzz and hype around it. Why? Because compared to what technologies we had at that time, it was very revolutionary. Why? Because previously the task, we used to solve the 3D reconstruction task. We used to use NERF. Now, how many people know NERFs here? People have an idea? Neural radiance fields. Okay. Okay. So NERF was basically you have an MLP, neural network. So with NERF, what you are doing is like you are giving some position in the 3D space and you are getting its RGB value as well as its depth as an output. Now the problem here is that you have a whole neural network and you have a whole 3D space. So in order to build this whole 3D space, you have to do the inference of neural network n number of times. Now that is very computationally inefficient as well as it is very slow. What Gaussian splatting was doing is it was doing everything in parallel. What was the difference? The difference was that in order to render this scene, let's suppose we have this scene, and we want to render this whole room in 3D with NERF and with Gaussian splatting. When we do it with NERF, the rendering speed, the FPS, the frames per second rendering speed with NERF would be like 2 to 10 FPS. And we are talking about the best techniques here that were published at that time in 2023. And with Gaussian splatting, the rendering speed is like 180 frames per second. So do you guys have an idea of rendering speed, frames per second? Have you watched have you played some computer games or stuff like that? So rendering speed is like, for example, how many frames you are rendering per second. So like an HD video has like 60 frames per second, 120 frames per second. Our mobile screens, if you have maybe iPhone had now 120 hertz screen, and previous years it was like 60 hertz screen. So that means that how much the screen is refreshing at per second level. So when we say higher rendering speed, that means that what is the smoothness? So when the rendering is slow, you will feel what you feel like is like everything is lagging. But when rendering is very fast, everything is very smooth. Now, the thing is that at NERF, we have an MLP. We learn a 3D scene with a neural network. But with Gaussian splatting, we project the whole scene with a Gaussian. So in MLP, we have no idea what is going on. But in Gaussian splatting, we know that which Gaussian is corresponding to which scene. Combining these all factors together, the speed, the explicit nature of Gaussian splatting, it become a very trendy thing. Even you guys remember there was last year, I think there was a Superman movie. So in that Superman movie, one of the rendering scene of Superman was basically generated using Gaussian splatting. So that's how it become popular, that even now in the mainstream movies, this technology is being used. So back in 2024 September, October, a lot of content creators, a lot of people who had no idea about, who are not even working on this research, were posting about this, because all of the sudden we were using nerves which were very slow, and now we have a new thing which was very efficient, very fast, and very way too much it made things very easy. So in research, we look things from the different perspective, but like the industry, they look things a bit different perspective, and their problems are a bit different. So even if you Google now 3D Gaussian tools, you will find a lot of stuff on the Google. What they ask you, give them some video, give them some scene, and they will give you a clean 3D scene of 3D Gaussian splat of that scene. And there are a lot of tools to render it online. They use post-processing on top of it, they clean the scene, stuff like that. All of those things were not possible with nerves. All of those things become possible with Gaussian splatting. So that was all these advantages of Gaussian splatting. But what were the disadvantages? Now, nerves, need just a single neural network. A single neural network at its most maximum size could be 30 MB. Now, you have a small scene or a big scene. It doesn't matter. You just need to have a neural network of 30 MB size to render that scene. But in Gaussian splatting, the bigger the scene, the higher the number of Gaussians. So for example, if we want to render this scene, we need approximately 1 million Gaussians. But if we go outside and render the whole area, we will probably need more than 10 million Gaussians. Now, for nerves, it would be just maybe a 60 MB neural network. For Gaussians, we need 2 million, 20 million, let's say, Gaussians. Now, as you increase the number of Gaussians, you will require more visual memory, you will require more training complexity, you will need more storage complexity. Everything basically linearly exceeds your complexity. So that was the major bottleneck. That was the major problem with when these Gaussian splatting techniques were introduced. So everybody is with me on this at this level. Any questions? Yeah. Yeah. I was just keeping at a very simple level to explain, to get the basic gist. But yeah, you are right that in nerves there are a lot of other complexities involved. But just to keep it simple and give the basic idea, I was going with this. Anything else? Any other questions? Okay. So uh, this says the same thing. Nerve size is very small, but the rendering speed is very slow. Here, the size is much higher, but the rendering speed is really, really fast, like maybe 20 to 30 times fast. So we have advantage of speed, but we have problem of memory. For example, we had one garden scene, one of the very famous scene in these data set. So with NERF, you just need 30 MB of neural network to render that scene. With Gaussian splatting, you need approximately 1.4 GB of point cloud file that you get at the end. The training memory complexity goes around like 15 GB. So, and it's like one of the complex scene, and that requires more than, I guess, about 2 million Gaussians, about 2 million Gaussians. So, in if you look at the big picture of how the Gaussian splatting compression moved on, we have this unstructured Gaussian splatting and structured Gaussian splatting. So unstructured means that we target the Gaussian splat at individual level. We are not talking about the big structure, the relationship between different Gaussians or stuff like that. We are looking at the each individual Gaussians in each Gaussian individually. We are not talking about the relationship between those Gaussians. There are other approaches, structured approaches, which basically try to make connections with those Gaussians, because like you have a lot of millions of Gaussians and some Gaussians are concentrated in one place. For example, you have these tables. So if you uh, visualize the point cloud or the position of Gaussians for this, if we render this scene, you will find a lot of Gaussians on this table, a lot of Gaussians for this chair. So you can decipher the structure that, okay, these structures are the same. So some of the approaches, some of the recent works try to do that. Most of my work basically revolved around this unstructured thing. So I will be more focusing on in this talk, I will be more focusing on how we did this unstructured compression. So my first work was trimming the fat, and the approach was gradient aware pruning. So the problem was that even in the original Gaussian splatting compression approach, they were considering during the training they were only removing some Gaussians, and what they were doing was they were only considering the opacity of it, but it was not like very aggressive. So the idea is, when we consider the opacity means that how much a Gaussian is visible or not visible. So that means that a Gaussian, there are millions of Gaussians that we are generating during the training process. Each and every one of those Gaussians is not visible. So even if you visualize the opacity of those Gaussians, you will find out that majority of them have very low opacity value, which inherently means that they are not visible. They are just redundant. So what we did, that we added this information with the gradient. That means, so like for example, look at this. So when we visualize the Gaussians, we have a trained Gaussian splat scene, and we see the opacity. And this is and if we visualize this, we will find that majority of the Gaussians have very low opacity. What we ideally want to achieve is kind of like this structure, that we have a balanced opacity levels. But here, most of the Gaussians are basically invisible. Now, one argument could be that it could be the nature of the scene. For example, like we have glasses here, we have lights here, we have some objects which require low opacity, like sky. Sky would always have low opacity. We don't have sky here, Thea. But like sky, if we go outside and visualize that, sky will have low opacity. But majority of the Gaussians are not have low opacity. So ideally, we want to have this. So if we only prune based upon opacity, what we will find out that we would be removing the Gaussians which are important and which will hurt the visualization performance of our scene. So ideally, what we want to achieve is kind of like this geometry. So we start from here, the initial state. The initial state says that like a majority of the Gaussians, the y-axis is basically in the millions or 100,000 maybe. Yeah. So majority of the Gaussians here have very low opacity. But when we do pruning, and what we do with pruning is that we iteratively remove the Gaussians. So for example, we have target goal, like we are starting with 2 million Gaussians, but we want to achieve at the end of the day like 1.2 million Gaussians. So what we do, we remove a part of Gaussians, fine tune again. We then remove a part of Gaussians, fine tune again. And we do it iteratively n number of times till we achieve our ideal goal. So when we achieve that ideal goal, in the middle, when we are removing a part of Gaussians, fine tuning again, we will have some kind of this structure. But the final level would be like this. So that means this graph basically says that now when you have pruned the Gaussians, almost all of the Gaussians that we have available now have high opacity. That means every Gaussian is contributing. And what we have small here are basically those which are required for due to the nature of the scene. But majority of the Gaussians here are contributing and are very important for the scene. So one question here is like why we can't remove them like this. Like for example, we have 2 million Gaussians and we just remove the 1 million Gaussians and then we can fine tune. It should work like. Do you agree with this or not? I'm throwing this question to you guys. So like rather than removing this n number of times, okay, let's remove 100 this time, then fine tune and do, and then repeat this process till we remove 1000. What if we just remove 1000 and then fine tune and we might be able to regain the performance? Do you think it works or not? You are making it more complex. Yeah, basically, yeah. Like for example, the criteria is like we are removing every like based upon some criteria, some arbitrary criteria, we are removing everything by once. So we use the same criteria. Like the criteria is fixed. The point is that what if we use the same criteria to remove part of it, or we use the same criteria to remove everything at once. So if we go back to the pruning research back in 2019 or 2020, this was very interesting question. That what if you remove everything at once or do iterative pruning? The idea is like iterative works, but why it works? So the basic assumption till that time was like you need a 3D prior. Like you have we are pruning at a trained scene. So we have some scene available and then we are pruning. So if we prune everything at once, we distort that structure. So rather than pruning at, at one shot, we do iteratively to preserve that structure. So we are removing a part of it, then fine tune it, preserve the structure. Then remove a part of it, then fine tune it to preserve the structure. So in the Gaussian splitting, even if you do it for at CNN level, transformer level, maybe at nerves, I'm not sure about nerves, but this assumption is generally true. When we remove some weights, when we prune the Gaussians, or we remove some layers in the transformers or stuff like that, we always do it iteratively. We don't do it at once. And this concept has been established a lot in the CNN and CNN literature basically, and now it has been carried forward. So we introduced gradient aware pruning. One concept was that opacity is low. The other was that other we introduced that gradient should be low as well. So we set some threshold. We say that opacity is low, okay. We need to find out gradient should be low as well. So if opacity is low, we don't know for sure whether that is important or not. It could be for glass surface, it could be for sky. But when gradient is low, we are for sure can say that if for that particular Gaussian, that Gaussian is not important. Its opacity is low, its gradient is low, and hence it's not even contributing in the scene. Let's remove it. So based upon when we do this, we can remove 70% of the Gaussians directly. And that basically increases the compression rate about 24x to 50x. And PSNR, we can maintain the PSNR. There would be some noise, of course. In some cases, it increases the PSNR, depends upon how aggressive we are pruning. But approximately 70% of the Gaussians can be removed without any drop in performance. And that's just by incorporating the opacity information as well as the gradient information. Now, uh, uh, some other related work try to introduce more information into it. Like for example, here we used only the opacity and the gradient information. Then there is scale information as well. I didn't try it personally, but there are some works who do that. So what does scale information or the covariance tells us is how big is the Gaussian. So they infer that like this, the size of the Gaussian is important or not. Like, is it redundant? Is it falling in the view of the screen or not? So they prune on base of that. I didn't try it personally, but like those works as well. But here, just by including the opacity information as well as the gradient information, we are able to prune 75% of the Gaussians without any drop in performance. So that goes, now let's go to the my next work. So we have Gaussian, we have pruned it, we are able to remove redundancy in the Gaussians. Now we want to make an end-to-end compressible approach. So for end-to-end compression, we need quantization as well as entropy encoding. So do you guys know about quantization? I guess, what about you guys? No idea. Okay. So let's talk about first quantization. So quantization in very simple terms, we are making something infinite to finite, or very simple terms, we are going from floating point to integers. It's just that. Like you are mapping 0.3 to 0, or you are mapping 2.5 to 2, or 2.5 to 3. In very simple terms, you're gonna do that. You're gonna go from 32-bit floating points to maybe 8-bit integer. So at the basic level, this happens. But like when we talk about how we do quantization at neural network levels, at Gaussian splitting, it becomes a bit of trick. It becomes a tricky process. So there are two types of quantization: scalar quantization and vector quantization. We come back to this a bit later. But now you have an idea, like we go from floating points to integer is basically quantization. Get this point? Everybody? Okay. So the pipeline is simple. We have pruning. So pruning means that we are removing redundant Gaussians. After pruning, we are doing quantization. Quantization, we are going from floating points to basically integer values to reduce the complexity of our data representation. And after that, we are doing entropy encoding. So anybody have an idea of entropy encoding? No. You guys, everybody might have compressed their files one way or the other on your PC, on your Mac. Everybody has done that? Basically, that is entropy encoding. Compression is entropy encoding. What we do in compression, we find out which pattern is repeating more. So if something is repeating more, that means that it needs, we can encode this information with less number of bits. And if something is rare event, we can assign more bits to that information. So that's how we normally compress things. So at the very basic level, when we do some, we use WinRAR to compress things, we use zip to compress things. At the back end of the things, basically that is entropy encoding. And that compression is basically non-lossy compression, that we are not losing any information in that compression. So now again, the pipeline. We first prune, we quantize, and then we compress. Compression means entropy encoding. So pruning process remains the same. We start from a trainable Gaussian, we prune, trained Gaussian, sorry. We start from a trained Gaussian, we have a trained scene available, we prune. Then we fine tune, then we prune again. And we repeat n number of times till we reach our target number of Gaussians. After that, we quantize. And as I've said you, that quantization is basically going from floating points to integers. But we have two different sorts of quantization: vector quantization and scalar quantization. Let's talk about vector quantization. So there is one algorithm, I'm forgetting the name, clustering algorithms. Do you guys know about clustering algorithms? Okay, you have a lot of data. You divide that data into like 5 points, and then you calculate, basically for each point you calculate in which group that point lies. And how you calculate it? You just calculate the distance between that point and the center point you calculated. So if you have big data, a lot of data points, and you created basically 5 representative center points for that data, so you can map everything in that data to those 5 points. You can say the same thing for vector quantization. Did you guys understand this point? Okay, you are lost. Okay, we have, let's suppose we have 1,000 points, right? And we take five groups of those those 1,000 points. So let's suppose we have linear data, 0 to 1,000, right? And we have 5 points. So for example, 0 to 200 would be mapped to the central point of 100. 200 to 400 would be mapped to the central point of 300, and so on. So every point from 0 to 1,000 would be mapped to its central point, to point with which it has minimum distance. So 1,000 points can be divided into a group of 5 with which they have minimum distance. Get this point? Okay, I hope so. So vector quantization works in the similar way. So you have a lot of data, you have a lot of points. You predefined that how much points we should map it to. So for example, depending upon your quantization, like 2 raised to power 8, 2 raised to power 16, stuff like that. You have like 128 points, 256 points, stuff like that. And every point in your data would be mapped to those 128 points or 256 points if we have 8-bit information, to which it has minimum distance. Now, with vector quantization, the problem is that you have this encoding and decoding process. The encoding process basically means that how you have to calculate the distance with each and every point and then map it to the point with which it has minimum distance. It has a cost. The advantage is its compression level is very high, but like the complexity, due to its complexity, it has complexity of, I guess, big O of n square. So and most of the compression methods still to date use vector quantization because its performance is good. Now we have scalar quantization. So scalar quantization is just multiplying it with a single number. So what we do is, during training, we identify for each value in our data set or our Gaussians, which value we should multiply it to such that it could be mapped to an appropriate integer. It's that simple. Here you have to encode and decode, you have to map to a particular centroid. For there, you just need to multiply. And how you figure out which number to multiply, that magic happens in the training. So the thing is, like, for example, when we do integer representation, we have fixed numbers. The difference between the real numbers is that real numbers are kind of infinite. So like there would be infinite number of values between 2.2, 2.3 and 2.4, or 2.3 to 2.35. But in integer numbers or like natural numbers, we have like finite representation. So when we say that we do 8-bit integer quantization, we have just 256 representation. Let's say all the data that we need to quantize is between -1 and 1. How we can find out those 256 distinct integer values with which we can map our with which we can map our data that lies between -1 and 1. And for that, we basically learn a step size. So I don't want to go into the detail of this, but like the thing is, we want to find a delta value that -1 would be, let's say, mapped to -1, but -0.9 would be mapped to -0.8. So we basically divide our data into n equal blocks. So -0.9 would be mapped to -1. -0.8 would be mapped to something like -0.8. So we map our values to distinct 256 or 128 representation based upon how many numbers we have available. Guess too much information now. So any questions till this point? Yes. Hmm. Okay. The thing is that is very important and very crucial questions. We don't analyze only one gradient. We have an average gradient history that is available. Even if you go to the Gaussian splatting code, they basically update their parameters based upon the whole gradient history. So when we calculate this, we have a whole gradient history available, and on the basis of that we find out that that Gaussian has low opacity as well as a low history of gradient. So on the basis of that, we remove that. So that answers your question. If we look at only one single iteration, then your point is valid. That for that, it could be low because it is not stable. So yes. So we have, yeah, yeah, yeah. Don't think so. There is a vanishing gradient problem. I haven't come across it. I think. I think like it's a very interesting question. Can we explore it from this perspective or not? But as much as I have seen, like I don't think so. There is a vanishing gradient problem in Gaussian spread. Any other question? Okay. So okay, just to remove the clutter, what we are doing here is that we are going from 32-bit floating points to basically integer values, equivalent integer values in quantization, and we use a CNN-based framework, learn step size quantization to do it properly. So to get the gist out of it, forget about all the details of quantization. We doing scalar quantization, in which for quantization we are multiplying with a single number to go from integer to floating point to a particular integer, and that magic happens during training. How that happens, let's forget about it at the moment. Okay, so in my analysis, what I find out that the most quantizable parameter in all these Gaussian parameters was basically SH spherical harmonics. This spherical harmonics is basically used to calculate the colors. So you can simply quantize them to like 8 bits. For all the other information, you basically that needs a lot of optimization, specifically the positions. So like you have XYZ positions. That means that in the 3D space where the Gaussian lies. So if you quantize those information, then you are losing a lot of quality. So I particularly struggled with quantizing those parameters. And I think to till this date, the most state of the art works only are able to quantize it to like 16-bit. They are unable to quantize it a bit lower on this. And to give you a perspective, uh, we have now like when we talk about diffusion model transformers, CNNs performs state of the art in 2-bit quantization. Diffusion models are performing well in like 4-bit quantization. LLMs are, I guess, performing well till 6 to 8-bit quantization. And here we can't going below 16-bit quantization. So that's a perspective. So entropy encoding. I give you an example that you just need to compress your, when you compress your files, you do entropy encoding. So what happens is basically like look at this input data. You have higher number of zeros, lower number of only one instance of 0.8 and 0.2. So the values which have higher frequency, that is 0, 0 is occurring higher number of times in the data, we are giving very low bit information to that. And those values which are occurring very higher number of times, we are associating more bits to it, because that is occurring very low number of times. And in this way, we basically compress information. That is the gist of entropy encoding. What is Morton ordering? So in entropy encoding, there is some basically some tricks and hacks. This is that trick and hack. So entropy encoding works better if, for example, if you have points in 3D space and those points lie closer, if similar points lie closer to each other, they can be able to compress better. So why we do modern ordering? So in modern ordering, we convert basically our 3D data to 1D data. And we find out that when we have 1D data, we are able to better structure analysis and compress it better. So it's just a kind of a trick or hack to make our data structure in such a way that basically increases its compression capacity. So modern ordering is basically that technique to structure it and to compress it in a better way. So we do entropy encoding and modern ordering once we have that quantized integer representation. So original Gaussian 1.4 GB, PSNR 31.3. With our high compression rates, 38x compression and 25 MB of memory with same performance. So that was with pruning, quantization, as well as entropy encoding. That was the result we were able to achieve. Sorry? Okay, so the output we get of Gaussian splatting is a point cloud file. So with the original Gaussian splatting, we are getting a point cloud file of 1.4 GB. With our approach, with same thing and everything, what we are getting is an output file of 25 MB. It would be a compressed representation. Okay, Gaussian splatting output is just a point cloud with additional features. That's pretty much it. So, and a standard point cloud has like points in the 3D space. With those points, you add more information, SH attributes, opacity, stuff like that. That Gaussian splatting is just a point cloud with additional features. So we compress everything. So like millions of Gaussians to like thousands of Gaussians, pruning, quantization, entropy encoding, you get this. If you direct apply entropy encoding on this, the reduction would be like 100 MB. Here we are going a lot down with the same place. So benchmarking performance, how much FPS we have increased. So in the beginning of the presentation, I said that Gaussian splatting revolutionized the field because of how fast it was. And we made it like 6 times more faster, like 4 to 6 times more faster than what it was before. Till now, in my analysis, the rendering speed is just directly correlated to how many Gaussians you have. With pruning, we can aggressively remove a lot of Gaussians. We did approximately 25x compression just with pruning. So with that, we can directly increase the rendering speed a lot. And that is like different variants of our model, like depending upon the compression ratio and performance you need. But this is like the maximum one, 38x compression, 570 FPS. 14x compression, that would be approximately 250 FPS or 300 FPS. So depending upon the need, depending upon the requirement, we have different variants. And that is like how much each module helps. So for example, if we start with a 1.4 GB scene, we just prune it, and by just pruning it, removing the redundant Gaussians, we do 306 MB of point cloud file size. Without doing quantization, if we apply direct compression entropy encoding to our prune Gaussians, we go to 257 MB. But if we take this prune file and then apply quantization and then apply entropy encoding, we go to 64 MB. So that's why quantization is very important. Yes. So depending upon the scene, like if we have 1.4 million or maybe 2 million Gaussians, we can go down to like 1.2 million or 1 million. Yes. 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 Exactly. Yes. Yes. So the major insight here is like, for example, how much difference in compression makes if you apply compression on floating points as compared to integer. So here in this, we are applying compression on floating point numbers, 32-bit floating point numbers. And we go just from 306 MB to 257 MB. Here we are applying applying quantization, we are going to 32-bit floating points to 8 to 30-bit integer values, depending upon which features we are talking about. And that directly compresses the representation a lot. So that's how much integer representation can be cost effective. There are two caveats into it. Basically, in how we use and how we code our things in PyTorch, uh, based upon just this approaches, pruning directly influences the rendering speed. For quantization, like in your case, ideally what we need to do is basically quantize the representation and use a quantized representation to do rendering and stuff. But the problem here is that when we quantize on our PyTorch code and GPUs, we are basically simulating the quantization. We are unable to visualize the real gains. Now there are some tools in which we can basically try to maybe I think in now in PyTorch it provides 16-bit and 8-bit floating point representation. So maybe just by using those representation, downsizing our data to like 8-bit or 16-bit floating points and applying quantization through that, I think we would be able to improve the PSLR. Ideally, the rendering speed. Ideally, the rendering speed improves with pruning only, but if we are able to code it properly to using the PyTorch representation of quantization, we were able to, I think, improve the rendering speed further. Okay, so one thing, like one question was that why, if everybody is using vector quantization, why we use scalar quantization? The thing is, scalar quantization is just hardware friendly. The vector quantization has complexity of big O of n square, but for vector quantization is just big O of, for scalar quantization, it was just big O of n. I haven't seen the recent literature that how much the compression gains we have achieved in all these algorithms, how much they are translatable to actual mobile devices, VR headsets, AR, IoT displays, stuff like that. There's still a lot of work going on for the VR headsets and stuff, but I don't think it is way too much optimized. And that is a trend in our community as well. Normally, we say that like, okay, 2-bit quantization really works well or performs really well. But when we use the same 2-bit quantization at the hardware level, the things are not working as good as it was advertised. So how we simulate things on our GPUs, on our hardwares, it doesn't really translate it to when we apply things to the actual hardware. And that is a very important bottleneck that like there is a whole other teams that try to solve that. But like this bottleneck actually exists, that when we, if even if I take this algorithm of mine to an actual hardware devices, there would be some other challenges that I not even thought about. One thing I'm for sure that works is that since with pruning we are directly removing the Gaussians, so it will perform good. But other than that, like how much the quantization is effective, how much other things are effective, you for every hardware you need to have its own specialized design, and you need to code it that way. So how much the gains are possible, we never know unless and until we apply it on the hardware level. So the future of 3D is lightweight. And that was the gist of the work that I did. So we basically solved the problem of efficiency, speed, and integration. The remaining issues, basically the extreme pruning, training visual RAM, fidelity ceiling, because we are pruning on the trained scene. So our baseline is basically that trained scene. We are not able to improve on top of that. So this was basically the gist of what I worked on. And then there is whole plethora of work that is basically structured compression. Uh, I would just give you the main basic idea of it. We won't be going on into much details. So in unstructured, we have all these Gaussians in 3D space, and we are basically looking at the Gaussian at its individual capacity. We are not seeing how these individual Gaussians relate to each other. We are seeing, okay, this Gaussian has a opacity gradient, okay, what is its quantization, stuff like that. We are not concerned about the relationship between those Gaussians. Then there are structured approaches which try to develop on those structure in the Gaussians. For example, as I've seen you, that for example, if you visualize this table, the Gaussians of this table, you will find out that most of them have a structure and they are very much correlated. And you can basically exploit that structure if you visualize the Gaussians in the 3D space. If you guys want to see this, go to Ali. He has some trend scenes available. He will basically can give you an idea of what I'm talking about when I say that structure table would have a lot of related Gaussians. Ali, you can show them the point cloud file. Okay, so in unstructured, we optimize each point. In structure, relationship between the Gaussians is considered. So the major work which basically introduced this was Scaffold GS. It was published in CVPR 2024. Yeah. So I'll give you the speed of this work. The original Gaussian splatting was published in August 2023. CVPR deadline is November 2023. So in 2 to 3 months, they basically come up with this work. And this is another different team on the other side of the planet. So how this work was popular, and this work basically set up the basis of structured compression. What they say is basically, like at a very simple level, they make a group of Gaussians. So for example, they say that this Gaussian is our central Gaussian, and they say that like we can predict 3 or 4 other Gaussians based upon this Gaussians. So for example, they take that, okay, in the 3D space, this is our Gaussian, and for all the other Gaussians in the nearby region, 4 or 5, they calculate the offset, that this Gaussian has this offset, like the distance, the difference between the metrics, stuff like that. They calculate this offset. And then they use some MLPs or neural networks to basically predict those offsets. And that means that they are just storing a single Gaussian and predicting the nearby region based upon a center Gaussian. So in general, like at a very basic level, that you are exploiting a structure. So you have a center point and you have nearby regions. So rather than storing all the nearby regions, you store only the center point and you try to predict the other nearby regions through an MLP. They're just doing that. And if you do it at the million Gaussian levels, and like for example, if you have million Gaussian levels and each Gaussian is used to predict like 4 nearby Gaussians, you are basically going to 250k Gaussians. So you can see how much compression we are talking about. So this work basically did that. Now there are other works which build upon this. They further exploited that structure. There is graph based, that like we have Gaussians in 3D space. They built a graph out of it. Like now we have a graph of millions of Gaussians. Now exploit that graph. You can do a lot, all sort of things with the graph. So they do that. Then there is factorization based approaches that apply linear algebra techniques on how to basically exploit a single Gaussian and develop a structure out of it. So the gist of it, the compression performance of these structured compression methods was way much high, and they were able to improve the rendering quality as well, better than the original works. So you can see here that this is the size of these structured compression methods. The sizes are less than 10 MB, and we started from let's suppose GBs. Now they have sizes less than 10 MBs and the performance better than the baseline. The unstructured compression methods lie here. They have sizes more than 10 MB, and but they are much in the performance wise, they are not as competitive as the structured compression methods. But the rendering speed, that's what the problem lies. Since you are exploiting the structure, you are building a lot of information. So in case of scaffold GS, you are predicting, you are using one Gaussian to predict all the other Gaussians nearby. That means that you are basically increasing the complexity. So before that, you are just rendering the scenes. In unstructured, you have removed the Gaussians, and now you just need to render the scene. That means you are basically, you don't have any post-processing to do, nothing to do. Just splat the, just visualize the Gaussians. Here, okay, we had this Gaussians, we need to predict this many Gaussians from this Gaussians, and then we have a structure, and then we will do splatting. So a lot of redundancy involved, a lot of computational complexity involved. So even though they were able to increase the compression ratio, improve the rendering quality, but the speed got very low, even lower than the baseline. So if the baseline FPS rendering speed was 180, they were operating at the level of 150, 100, 90, 80. But the unstructured compression approaches are going from 180 to 600, 180 to 500 to 400. You can see here. So for example, this approach may have PSNR of more than 30, but if FPS is less than 100. But here we have an PSNR of 29.4. FPS is about in the ranges of 500, which is extremely fast. So when we do a comparative analysis of unstructured and structured, the one thing of unstructured is it is mostly plug and play. You have a baseline algorithm, a very popular baseline algorithm, and you can just apply some tricks onto it to further improve it. Now, when a technique becomes very popular, these kind of things help a lot. So for example, if we have a transformer architecture, if somebody tries to improve that transformer architecture by doing some tricks to it, rather than introducing another architecture which is inspired from transformer architecture, it is very difficult to scale it. But something that is very popular, used widely by everyone, if you apply some techniques that can be just plug and play, those techniques become very popular. Unstructured approaches, majority of them work like that. You have a baseline algorithm, apply these techniques on top of them, it will further improve the baseline algorithm performance. Okay, structured techniques, every technique is different. Okay, we compress this way, we exploit structure this way. Second technique, okay, we build on this and we further try to exploit the structure in this way. Performance increases, compression quality increases, but every technique is different. It's not generalizable. Rendering speed, uh, unstructured very high, structured even lower than the baseline. PSNR, unstructured maintaining the PSNR, structured approaches further improving it. Unstructured are using mostly scalar quantization, vector quantization, but structured, there are some approaches which are even using scalar quantization as well. So in all, the compression ratio of structured method is much better. Their training speed is much lower. Their rendering speed is lower. The unstructured compression methods, their training speed is higher. Their implementation simplicity is much higher, and their rendering speed is also very higher as well. Compression ratio is a bit on the lower side as compared to structured compression. So, what are the challenges that are left? We can visualize this scene. We can even visualize all our surroundings in this building. But what if we want to visualize the whole of UNIST? Maximum GPU memory is what is the H100, H200 GPU memory? 80 GB, 100 GB? Even this room training memory would exceed 10 GB. So if we talk about training the whole UNIST, you know how complex it would be. There is a hardware gap. To be honest, if you look the practical application of Gaussian splatting, it's mostly the lower edge devices, low power devices. But we don't know at the moment that how much these techniques and these simulations work well on the low power edge devices. And then there is another optimization level question in which I've personally worked on and seen that things work differently, that loss functions. We are using only L1 and SSIM losses in the Gaussian splatting optimization. What if we use edge losses? What we use high frequency losses, low frequency losses, things like that to further improve the quality? Can we further improve the unstructured compression with doing some techniques like that? Could they improve the performance? Stuff like that. So, scalar, there are like a lot of directions, and these directions were mostly like I come across. I proposed myself in like 2024 or 2025, but now the field is like there is dynamic Gaussian splatting, there is general purpose like feed forward Gaussian splatting. Like for example, here we are training a scene individually. Now we have networks that, for example, you have a general purpose network. You, let's say you can say that foundation model for Gaussian splatting. Works are going in this direction. We give pictures of that model to the scene, and it will give the Gaussians of that scene to us. We can give it like picture of the outside of the scene to the same network. It will give the Gaussian splats of that scene to us. Things are now moving in that direction. So, scalability is the key to deployment. That means like we need to work more on reducing the complexity. We are memory complexity, training complexity, storage complexity. It's not about just quality, it's about efficiency as well. Because at the end, the application of these Gaussian splatting is mostly for mobile devices, edge devices, VR and AR devices. So that's pretty much it. Thank you so much for listening. And if you have any questions, please let me know. Slide 34. Okay, just give me a sign because I'm not seeing the numbers. Yeah, this one. Yeah. I think so, but I'm not like very much familiar with this task. But the way you phrased it, I think it is possible. The way you phrased it, I think it is possible, but like I'm not even sure because I'm not much aware of how the things work in the graph world. So like the kind of thing that Yalam is working on, like we have a canonical force and we map. I I I think that is more sort of an implementation problem. Like for example, in those approaches, the limitation is that we are for every SMPL vertices we are corresponding having Gaussians. Let's say we identify that okay, for one vertex this Gaussian is redundant. So how we basically, if we remove it, how we basically solve the dependency that, for example, if we move it, if we render it in like novel poses, how will it perform? One maybe we could try that. For example, we can reduce the information level of that Gaussians. Maybe we assign it with some null values or something like that. But I think it's more sort of an implementation level problem because the thing is with my approach, you can identify that which Gaussian is redundant. But like how you utilize that information, then that is a problem. Because for every SMPL vertex, we have a corresponding Gaussian. So how you manipulate it, that becomes a question. But you can do, I think we can do at least analysis of it, that maybe how many vertices we have? Yeah. No? Okay, so 167 k vertices. Analysis could be done that with this approach, that how many of those questions are important or not important. We can, like, this could be done, and based upon that we can visualize that we can, if we remove those questions, like which areas the questions are seeming redundant or not. That could be one thing, and on the basis of that we can look up more into it, I think. Thank you. 24. Yeah, actually there is a whole field to it. It is called mobile vision. So for example, we do two sorts of compression. One compression that basically for humans. For example, I send an image to you on WhatsApp or Kakao. Uh, During that, compression occurs. That is compression for humans. Then there is another compression in which you do just compression for machine. So for example, you have CCTV footages or stuff like that in which you want to automate. So you want to compress those footages in such a way that it directly goes to a AI, and it basically evaluates that. So there is whole field to it which is called mobile vision, compression for mobile vision. So it basically targets that, and then for that there are some strategies that you don't even need to save the image. You can operate at the feature level. You can what you do, and basically how you exactly measure the compression ratios is basically there is BD rate, and then there is RD curves, rate distortion curves. So like the thing is that if you have higher rate, you have higher PSNR. If you have low rate, like higher compression ratios, you would have lower PSNR. So it's a, like a trade-off, and it's mostly like I think it is like it is derived from Shannon's entropy. Okay, any other question? You guys need to have a question. No, you don't. Ask me something like in which you were lost. You had no idea what is going on. Okay, so in simple words, in unstructured, we don't need to do. Uh, so, for example, in my unstructured approaches, uh, when we do all this pipeline, quantization, pruning, and entropy encoding, so when we have to render the scene, there is no like computational complexity involved. You have a scene which is already very complex, very compressed, and you just need to render it. But in structured approaches, the scene is compressed in such a way that you need to predict more things. Like you have one Gaussian information available, but you need to predict the Gaussians around it. So, for example, the starting point of the rendering comes after a lot of complexity. So even though we are exploiting the structure to improve the PSNR or the visual quality, but that structure in itself is costing in terms of computational complexity. That first we need to do this, we need to predict A from B, then B from C, C to D, and once we have ABCD available, then then we visualize and render. In unstructured approaches, ABCD is already available. You just need to render. So that's how like there is a performance, there is like a complexity gap between unstructured approaches and structured approaches. Good question. Any other question? Oh, step size. That is actually will take a lot of time. Okay. So basically, we have let's go to the CNNs. So if you look at some CNN layer, it would have a range of weight. Like let's suppose -2 to let's say +13. It could be uniform distribution, or it could be normal distribution, or it could be some sort of random distribution. So, but in quantization, depending upon what sort of quantization we are doing, there is like fixed number of representations. So, for example, we have 128. If we do 8-bit quantization, we have 256 numbers available. The step size needs to be uniform. So, for example, uh, -13 could be mapped to 0, +13 could be mapped to 128. So 128, 127, 126, 125. The step size calculate what should be the difference between those numbers. So with this step size, if we are able with training, we can identify that step size could be 0.5. So rather than mapping -128 to 127, we can map to -128, 127.5, 127. So step size basically defines that with which number we need to map. I know I'm not very clear about it, but I'll get back to you on this. Yes, yes. So we identify and train the step size during training, and once the training is done, we use that step size. It's a bit tricky. I agree. Any other question? Uh, yeah. Yes. 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 Actually, that is very interesting for me as well. That uh, when I was searching on it, like very few papers that I found out that use different sort of losses on training Gaussians. So that is interesting. That why not people exploring it? Because even in my experience, loss function makes a lot of difference. Like even a very small change can make a lot of difference in the loss function. So a lot changes in the optimization curves when you use different loss functions. But I agree with you. I think it's a nice direction that could be explored. Okay, any other questions? People from the back.